Wisconsin I is in Oshkosh at the Democratic State Convention, interviewing 2nd District Congressman Mark Pocan. Mark, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Steve.
You are in Washington at a potentially historical time. So let's start with that. The Mueller report isn't in yet. Last time I interviewed you a few months ago, I asked you about potential impeachment vote without the Mueller report. Update me on Mueller, the investigation, the president, please.
Yeah, I think the Mueller investigation just keeps moving forward as it should. It's been maybe 15 months now, which by investigation standards is a pretty small amount of time. We've already had at least 23 indictments, so it's moving as a good investigation should, and we're just kind of waiting till they finish what they're doing. We'll look at it as a Congress, but clearly we're concerned with already what they found. We want to make sure that there was no collusion, there was no obstruction of justice, and all the other issues that are perhaps being looked at, and I think we're trying to do it in a patient, responsible way as Congress should.
Giuliani said that the focus on the president should wrap up by September 1. A sign that he doesn't expect the president to be cited or charged for obstruction of justice. Do you put much stock in what the former New York mayor is saying?
Rudy Giuliani says a lot of things. Most of them are wrong. I can tell you that by investigation standards, I think the Benghazi investigation went 4 years, no indictments. The Clinton email investigation went 2 years, no indictments. We're at like 15 months. So this is still a pretty short term for this type of investigation, yet they've still yielded 23 indictments. So I think, whatever they're doing seems to be working. Let's let it finish as it naturally should. And any artificial deadlines are pretty ridiculous.
Republican Representative Trey Gowdy said the FBI did nothing wrong.
Yeah, no, he's a Republican who's just basically saying, look, all this subterfuge that the White House is putting out there is nothing more than, misdirection. The reality is, let's let an investigation of professionals go ahead. The FBI has done their job as professionals, and at the end of the day, we'll see if there's anything or if there's not, but let it proceed as it should and let the FBI do their job.
Do you expect your Dems to take the House on November 6th?
I think so. I'm very optimistic. I think, we need 24 seats to take the majority. I used to always argue there's probably 70 competitive districts out of 435 because of all the gerrymandering by both parties, to be fair. Yeah. But the map has gone to 90, and then it went to 110. We're actually aggressively playing in 110 districts because even some that have maybe an 8-point Republican margin these days, with watching the special elections that we've had across the country, that now is a competitive seat. So there's a lot of turf to pick up those 24 seats.
If your party controls, you're pretty good at taking the temperature of those you serve with. Do you expect the House to move on an impeachment resolution?
Again, I think a lot will depend on what the Mueller investigation does. So I think those of us who are, trying to take this in the wisest approach are just waiting for it to finish. And at that point, we'll have something to look at.
If your party takes control, what committee role would you have? What leadership role would you anticipate having?
Well, I serve on the Appropriations Committee and a subcommittee. I serve on the Agriculture Subcommittee, but also the Labor, Human Services, Education Subcommittee, which outside of defense is the second biggest chunk of dollars that go through the federal government. So, I'm really happy to be there because obviously social services and those programs, there's a lot that involve people in the district and across the state of Wisconsin. Education, I've been dealt extensively since I've been in Congress, either on the Ed and Workforce Committee or now on Appropriations on those issues. And labor is something close to my heart. I'm a nearly 3-decade-long member of the Painters and Allied Trades. So it's really a perfect committee for me to be working on, and in the majority, we have a lot of responsibility in how we allocate dollars.
One more what-if question. If your party took control, would you vote to re-elect Representative Pelosi as the Speaker?
I think the answer we're trying to tell everyone is wait to get the majority first. And if we get the majority, you're going to have a couple weeks to ask us that question ad nauseum. Okay. But the real important thing is we have to keep our eyes on one thing, and that's on winning the November elections. Otherwise, the rest of these conversations are kind of moot points.
Farming is important to Wisconsin and the 2nd District. The Farm Bill went down. What's the future of the Farm Bill, Mark?
It's a good question. I'm kind of surprised Paul put it on the floor because I could count that the math wasn't there. They never worked with Democrats at all. They had some provisions in there they knew were toxic to us and never tried to work with us on anything. So you weren't going to get a lot of Democratic votes because that's how they've decided to operate on all issues, one party. But then a couple major conservative groups came out and some of the Tea Party people came out against it. Well, at that point, it didn't take a whole lot to figure out it wasn't going to move forward. So I think the question is, at some point, will Paul be a responsible Speaker of the House, which means a speaker for everyone, and reach out to Democrats and figure out how to get our votes? Or is he going to let it languish and do something else? I don't know. I've been incredibly unimpressed with Paul's leadership style, so I don't know what route he'll take. But the smart thing would be to come and talk to the Democrats, figure out how to get it done in a bipartisan way, as the egg bill traditionally has been done.
Do you think your party will take the U.S. Senate? I know you serve in the House, but you're out there in Washington.
Yeah, the best prospects are in the House. You know, the map is a little tougher on the Senate, but depending on how big the blue wave, so to speak, is, that's going to tell us whether we can also pick up the Senate. No matter what, you'll still have a Republican president. So there's all kinds of challenges to still moving things forward, but right now the House is the most in play, but I'm not ruling out the Senate.
Well, that was my next question. If Democrats control the House, Republicans keep the Senate, and Mr. Trump is still in the White House, how does anything get done?
Well, that's going to be up to, I think, our legislative leaders and also really the president. There's a couple areas that I could see where the president's talked about, at least at the top lines, that there's some agreement. Infrastructure spending. Our nation's infrastructure has a D+ grade from the American Society of Civil Engineers. 1 out of every 6 bridges in this country is old enough to be eligible for Medicare. We know in Wisconsin, we just had the tragedy, of a bridge in Lafayette County. Now they've changed weight limits on a bunch. I mean, our infrastructure really has to be addressed. Right now, the president has a 20-80 split, which is 20% either from real dollars, 80% coming from private investors or local governments. That's not going to happen. So if you could maybe change that around and put some real investment in, we've been staying, as Democrats, $1 trillion is needed. As the Progressive Caucus, which I co-chair, we've had a $2 trillion we said we would want to put in to get us to that $4.6 billion that's necessary, but that could be an issue area. The other one maybe is prescription drugs. The head of the FDA has come before my committee on a number of occasions, and from conversations I've had with them, I believe there is some areas around generics and others that we are in agreement. I always, Reed Ribble, my friend from Congress, a Republican who's no longer there, but what we always said was figure out what you've got in common, get those things done, and then you've got a basis to get everything else. We don't do that right now. We don't get the easy stuff done. Let's figure out some of the easy stuff that we could do that'd be in the best interest of the country, period. And then maybe we'll have a basis for other things.
So your Progressive Caucus, is willing to offer $2 trillion towards a infrastructure package?
Yes.
How do you raise it when we have a $21 trillion deficit?
Yeah, you can nearly get $1 trillion alone off a high-speed financial transaction fee like they do in the European Union and other places. So for all those traders that do the multiple second tradings, it's a small percent off of that. That's $1 trillion alone a year, and there's a number of other ways that we put out in our Progressive Caucus budget showing you how to get there. Bottom line is there's ways you can do it and actually put that investment in, and we can tell you from polling, people get that our infrastructure is crumbling. Granted, it's even worse in Wisconsin because we have a governor who's not doing his job. We have some of the worst roads and bridges in the country. But across the country, we've got to make a real investment, and I think that's just one example, a simple little example of how you can raise the revenue.
I find the DACA debate in Washington absolutely fascinating with the discharge petition. Are enough Republicans going to sign to force a vote on the floor?
So we're 4 Republicans shy right now. If we can get 4 more Republicans, we should be able to force a vote. The actual proposal, by the way, is pretty modest. There's 4 major pieces of legislation out there. It's got a terrible inside the Beltway name called Queen of the Hill, but it's 4 major pieces you'd vote on. Whichever one got the most votes coming out of the House would be the one that advances to the Senate. So that's what the discharge petition is for. So you could have one that I may not like, that the Tea Party might like, but they get a chance to vote, see how many votes they can get. There might be one that can get a lot more support, bipartisan, then let that one go forward. We know there are at least 50 Republicans that have signed on to a bill or a letter in some way to fix the DACA situation. So we know there's bipartisan votes. Paul Ryan is the person who's held up putting a vote on the floor because he's letting the Tea Party have the keys to the car right now. And that's pretty ridiculous. So this is a way to try to force leadership, in this case Paul Ryan, to do the right thing, and they're 4 members shy right now.
But you've heard McConnell say, look, we spent a whole week debating it. We couldn't come up with anything. Anything the House passes dead in the Senate?
No, that would force the Senate to act. I mean, let's face it, real people that don't live in the Beltway actually have ideas around this, and they think that DACA never was a problem. It only got broke by the president, and quite honestly, he can fix it, but if he won't, then we need to fix it because we're the elected representatives. But people really get this issue far more than the debate that we're having inside the Beltway on this.
The president just now, it changes daily, announced that there will be a summit with a North Korean leader on June 12th. Are you hopeful, or is this
I'm hopeful whenever we're
just
trying
one more
to do...
soundbite for today?
I'm hopeful whenever we're talking about diplomacy rather than tweets talking about the size of buttons or nicknames or anything else for international leaders. I mean, it's been embarrassing most of the last year how the president deals with other countries, and our position across the world, whether it be on some of the tariff issues right now or on issues like this, has gone down so much. So the fact that at least we're willing to have some conversations is a good thing. I know he keeps, we're in, we're out, all the rest. I'm willing to have a little patience and see where this proceeds, but anything that's in diplomacy, I think, is a net plus.
Okay, let's go back to the question, if Democrats control. You're on the Appropriations Committee. What would be your top priority in the next Congress?
Well, it depends on, do we have the Senate? Where's the president? I mean, there's a lot of variables there, Steve. I would say, being on the subcommittees I'm on, I would love to see us get back to the normal process of passing 12 bills, because when you do that, you can amend any bill. The full Congress has an ability to have a say, you'd have the full debate, and there's a lot that we need to do. Just in higher education, just as one example, I have the Perkins loan bill I do with a Republican from New York. We have over 245, I believe, sponsors. The majority in Congress is 218. Right. Paul Ryan won't put it on the floor. The Perkins Loans Program right now is not reauthorized. That's going to hurt real people trying to get a higher education. So that one should be a simple one again. We have 245 bipartisan sponsors. So let's work on things like that. Kind of the conversations you and I have had over the years, Steve, I think if we can get some of that moving forward, that would be a good start. I'm not trying to say let's change the world in a single bill, but let's just start showing that Congress can work again, and it will start working.
Speaker Ryan has said he wants to run through the tape, serve through January. Does he last as Speaker?
I don't know, and quite honestly, I don't care. Paul's been a non-existent speaker. He gave the keys to the Tea Party. Tea Party say no all the time, so we don't really do anything in Congress, in case you haven't followed it. We're really good at doing nothing or not getting things done, and Paul hasn't been able to deliver as a speaker. So I'm just waiting for someone who maybe can get things done. We'll see if the next person can, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, but I would be lying if I didn't tell you I've been terribly disappointed in Paul Ryan's speakership. We're
at the Democratic State Convention. As you mingle with these activists, is there a blue wave coming, Mark?
Oh, it's a tsunami, I believe. When you start looking at around the country, we've had 41 either special elections largely or a couple off-cycle regular elections for state legislative seats since Donald Trump got elected. 41 of them have flipped from Republican to Democratic, and only 4 the other direction. That's a 10-to-1 ratio. I like that. And it's in Wisconsin, and we see it in other places. Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. First time since '96 an open seat picked up on the Supreme Court by someone who's more progressive, because, again, we saw the turnout happen. I think there's a couple things going on. One is our base is energized, and they're getting out to vote. 2, I think some of the people that back Donald Trump have buyer's remorse. He promised a lot, hasn't delivered, been erratic at best. And then there's a new phenomenon we're seeing in the suburban areas where people who aren't necessarily Democrats or Republicans but are tired of being forced into awkward conversations with their kids about porn stars, S-holes, very fine Klansmen and Nazis. I mean, these are the things that they're now having to have conversations with their kids about that they are the parents didn't really want to do. And we have a president and a complicit Congress that's really made that happen. So I think we're seeing that factor. We saw it in the special election in Wisconsin, Senate District 10. We saw it again in the Supreme Court race. We've seen it around the country.
Well, today's question in Washington is the president would like Savannah Bee to lose her show. Should she, given what she said?
In Washington, we should not be talking about Savannah Bee?
Savannah Bee.
Whatever. I think the president should be talking about something weightier, and that's part of our problem, right? He's got his 280 characters now to tweet. I have to, every morning, first thing I do before I even get out of bed, I check my Twitter account. But that's how sad the state of affairs is. Instead of talking about how to make sure that we have good, strong-paying jobs for people across the country, how we make sure we have health care access for every single person, here we are talking about cable shows. That's a problem.
Let's turn to the race for governor. Good thing that there are 10 candidates who've got enough signatures to speak to this convention?
Yeah, it's a great
Why
thing.
Is it
So, Steve, this is interesting. As I was preparing my speech for tonight, I looked at my speech from last year, And a bunch of it was about how the Republicans were making fun of the Democrats for having no candidates, and we were afraid to take on Scott Walker. And I promised that we were going to have candidates and good candidates. So I under-promised and over-delivered, maybe. We have great candidates. Maybe too many, but it's fine. That's a primary, right? Let the Democratic voters decide who they think is the best person. I think almost to the person, they are able to have a better set of, in fact, to the person, they'll have a better set of issues to beat Scott Walker. At the end of the day, people know that we have not expanded healthcare in this state like over about 2/3 of the states have now. We've not funded our schools or our higher education university adequately. This Foxconn proposal, it's going to cost $4.5 billion for the next 25 years, and only a few people are going to benefit from it. There's a lot of things that this governor has to answer for, and I think that puts us in a really good place.
Mark, I'm glad you brought up Foxconn, because driving up here, I heard a news story, because I'm a news junkie, and so are you.
Yes.
That you are advising the Democratic candidates for governor that Foxconn is issue 1,
Yes.
the most toxic issue.
Absolutely.
But what about if Foxconn is building a building and has hired 900 people on November 1? Isn't that on the plus side for the governor?
We are giving, originally it was $3 billion. Now it's up to $4.5 billion through local and transportation
If you count
subsidy
all the locals and the
to a foreign corporation to create jobs in a corner of the state where many of those jobs will likely be from out of state, and yet everyone across the state in 72 counties will be paying for this. They have potholes in bad roads that aren't getting repaired and being delayed because of the Foxconn proposal. They're going to pay for this and not see a benefit in the vast, vast majority of the state. And we're doing something with water and the environment that many people also are concerned about. This is a lose-lose-lose proposition, and if the governor was really proud of it, when he announced for governor, he would have mentioned it, and he didn't even say the words Foxconn when he announced for governor. I think as you look at this issue, this is finally the issue that makes people say, you know what, maybe it's a time for Scott Walker to get his first private sector job.
As a party leader, will you demand that the 9 candidates for governor who don't win the primary support the nominee?
Yeah, I have no question that will happen. In fact, I'm staying out of the governor's primary for now because I'm taking on a role of peacemaker. I want everyone to realize the person to beat is Scott Walker, not each other, and you don't do that by having negative campaigns. You, of course, can compare yourself in a fair way. You can talk about your credentials, but there's so much positive to run on, they should do that. And if they start attacking each other, that is not good for any of us come November. So I will call out people, and I'll ask others to call them out should they do that. But right now, they've been running very good races. We're 6 weeks out from the primary. I hope we can, finalize these final weeks in a positive way. Or not 6 weeks out, I'm sorry. We're 10 weeks out from the primary. Yeah.
Is it a smart strategy for the Dem candidates for governor, to twin him up, to lash him to President Trump?
I think you're going to see that happen regardless, because people can put 2 and 2 together, right? And I think that's going to happen. And as we know, this is a state where Trump narrowly won, but he's had some of his biggest drop-off of support has been up in Wisconsin. So, people, again, didn't, they thought that when he talked tough about trade, he meant something. Instead, I don't even know what his trade policy is. He's got random tariffs and everything else happening. They're incoherent. He said some right things about some issues that I think people who, have not seen their paychecks grow thought maybe he'd be there. Talked about draining the swamp. I'll tell you, if there's one thing that Donald Trump did, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump had a very similar message around whether it be draining the swamp or about the rigged economy. And it resonated because they both were right. The problem is Donald Trump added to the swamp, and he built a high-rise luxury condo on it. He just brought his own swamp creatures. So I think, again, he hasn't performed what he promised, and that's part of the buyer's remorse. You're not seeing people come out and vote. You tie that to Scott Walker, and again, it's an additional arbitrage.
2 final questions. Do you think the tariffs with Canada and the European Union and with Mexico will hurt Wisconsin?
I'll tell you, it's so chaotic. He'll say he's going to do them, and then say not yet, and then do them, and then postpone them, and then he says China's the bad player, but we're not putting tariffs on China. We're helping out Chinese corporations instead of. It's so chaotic. And I am someone who is not against targeted tariffs. There's a way to use them effectively, but you have to have a strategy. And I don't think there's a person yet I've seen in the Trump administration explain a strategy around trade. So I have lots of concerns.
Then the final question, it involves the U.S. Senate race. Senator Vukmir got the endorsement of the Republican Party. Are you concerned about a Senator Vukmir versus Senator Baldwin race on November 6th?
No, I'll tell you, Tammy Baldwin has run on issues that resonate with people. Buy American provisions. It's all about good-paying jobs, here in the state, access to health care. She's talked about that since she was a county board member a long time ago. Fighting the opioid crisis, shared her very personal story about her mother. I mean, she is connecting in a way that is very Wisconsin, and a lot of the special interests in Washington don't want someone who's representing Wisconsin first. They want someone to represent them first. Leah Vukmir will do a great job of representing the swamp if that's what people want. But again, I think people can see past what she's selling.
Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you.
Of course.
Have a good convention.
Thank you, Steve.
Good to see you again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
you.
Yep.